So Roger Morehouse, this one is for lovers of plucky bolts,
Plucky bolts.
which I had to practice saying. So this is Baltic by Oliver Moody.
Yes.
Now, this is a book that you genuinely completely adore because you have
I
been
did.
banging on about this all year.
I have, I'm afraid. It's one of my best books of the year. Brilliant. And he moves or takes the Baltic states, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, which I think for most people are kind of, off somewhere in the east. And most of us probably couldn't find them on the map. But he, takes them and he places them really front center in our, collective understanding of the modern world, I suppose. He places them front center in, modern politics, modern geopolitics, particularly with regard to Russia. And he tells us why that is, why they are as significant as they are.
Yeah.
Looking back at, particularly 20th century history, but beyond as well. And it's really, really well done. I mean, he's the Times correspondent in Berlin. So what's particularly pleasing about it is that I suppose you could have that job and be very kind of Germanocentric, have a very German view of the world.
Mm.
He has evidently, I think from this book, he has a very Central European or Eastern European view of the world. He gets it. He understands why the Baltic states feel the way that they do, particularly about Russia and about, the modern world. And he just describes it really, really well. And it's not a comforting read, I'll be honest. It's quite alarming because a lot of the the red flags that the Baltic states collectively are kind of raising, particularly about Russia, are sort of routinely being ignored by the rest of the world. So in a sense, what he's making is a plea for the Baltic states to be a bit more listened to in the outside world, in the EU and NATO and the rest of it. Which is kind of happening. I mean, there's some of those characters, like Kaja Kallas is a very good example. She's Estonian, right? So she's a very good example of a Baltic figure who has a big platform in Europe as the spokesman for foreign affairs. But I think, as I would agree, and as he says, they need to be listened to more.
Yeah, I visited the Baltic states for the first time not long after the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and it was so interesting being there at that point because there was such a sense in the air that that the unthinkable had happened in Ukraine, and there was no reason why the unthinkable couldn't happen again.
Yeah,
to the Baltic states. I mean, they feel that very keenly.
they do.
And when you're taking as I did, a couple of long buses across those endless sort of forests of that region, and you're like, my gosh, this forest that I'm endlessly trundling through, you probably trundles all the way to the Arctic Ocean, all the way through the Soviet Union. Like, there's no, the Soviet Union's there's no
Freudian slip there.
Yeah. There's no kind of, it's just all the sort of same endless kind of endless sweep of landscape. And that geography has, doomed them time and again.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
And what's incredible is how amazingly well they've reinvented themselves since the collapse of the Soviet Union. I mean, they are absolutely staggeringly successful considering where they started.
And they've really been exemplars of all of the Western everything that makes the West what it is, rule of law, a stable democracy.
But
and
does
all
he
that.
talk about why corruption hasn't been the problem that in the Baltic states in the way that it is in other former parts of the Soviet Union?
I think there's there was such a thirst, I think, in the Baltic states. They'd been independent that 20 years in the interwar years, and then swallowed up by the Soviet Union, and really treated very, very badly under Soviet rule until 91. And bear in mind, it was the Baltics that kind of almost made the first break, with the Baltic Way and so on, around 1989. And the first cracks in the Soviet edifice came from the Baltic states. But there was such a thirst for everything that to them the West represented, rule of law and, stable democracy and all of that stuff, that in a sense, they saw it as their destiny to embrace all of that. So, of course, there were the same pressures as there are elsewhere to go down those roads that we don't want them to go down, of corruption and so on. But I think the collective thirst to do the right thing was enough to carry them through.
Amazing.
So it's
Okay.
a remarkable story,
And a remarkable book.
and it's a really good book, and I heartily recommend it.
Baltic by Oliver Moody.
So for fans of plucky bolts, I'll say
I'm
it for
definitely
you.
a fan of plucky bolts.